we will move on. So this is what I want to ask, because instead I just keep going. So Steve, if you don't mind, you can just share about the Machiavelli, and then some of the things that you can talk. And then I want you to show this here, this one. So let me click this one. And so this is a very short summary about Machiavelli. So let me see here whether we can watch it. Okay, let's see whether it works. Okay, it's a very short, 7 minutes.
If you're trying to lose belly fat, stop doing cardio. It's
Okay,
two fast words, right?
okay, all right. So we like that, but anyway. So can you see it?
We're often appalled by
Yep.
how dry and
Okay.
dishonest many politicians are, but we shouldn't be. In moves like this, we need to remember and read the works of Niccolo Machiavelli, a late 15th century political advisor and political theorist who argued that we shouldn't think that politicians are immoral and simply bad for lying and dissembling and maneuvering. A good politician, in Machiavelli's remarkable view, isn't one who's friendly and honest and kind. It's someone, however occasionally dark and underhand they might be, who knows how to defend, enrich, and bring honor to the state, which is also an extremely important goal. Being nice may well be a virtue in general, but what citizens most need from their rulers is effectiveness, which may well call upon some darker arts. Once we understand the faith of the climate, we stand to be less disappointed and clearer about what we want from our politicians. Niccolo Machiavelli was born in Florence in 1469. His father was a lawyer, and so Machiavelli received an extensive formal education and got his first job as a secretary for the city of Florence. But soon after his appointment, Florence exploded politically and expelled the Medici family, who'd ruled it for 60 years, and suffered decades of political instability and turmoil. As a consequence, Machiavelli experienced a series of career reversals. Over just a few decades, he went from being an important diplomat to a semi-successful general to an enemy of the state, tortured and then exiled when the Medici returned to power. Although Machiavelli was rather a failed politician, he can be remembered as a truly great man because of two works he wrote, The Prince and The Discourses. In them, he attends to a central problem of politics then as now, that it's almost impossible to be both a good politician and a good person in the traditional Christian sense. Machiavelli proposed that the overwhelming responsibility of a good prince is to defend the state from external and internal threats to stable governance. This means he must know how to fight, but more importantly, he must know about reputation and the management of those around him. People should neither think he is soft and easy to disobey, nor should they find him so cruel that he disgusts his society. He should seem unapproachably strict, but reasonable. When Machiavelli turned to the question of whether it was better for a prince to be loved, feared, he wrote that while it would theoretically be wonderful for a leader to be both loved and obeyed, the prince should always err on the side of inspiring terror, for this is ultimately what keeps people in check. Machiavelli's Christian contemporaries had suggested that princes should be merciful, peaceful, generous, and tolerant. They thought that being a good politician was, in short, the same as being a good Christian. But Machiavelli argued differently. He asked his readers to dwell on the incompatibility between Christian ethics and good governance, and particularly refer to the case of Girolamo Savonarola. Savonarola was a Dominican friar, a fervent, idealistic Christian who'd briefly come to be the ruler of Florence in 1494. He'd come to power promising to build the city of God on earth in Florence. He preached against the excesses and tyranny of the Roman and even managed for a few months to lead Florence as a peaceful, democratic, and relatively honest state. However, Savonarola's success could not last because, in Machiavelli's view, it was based on the weakness that always attends being good in the Christian sense. It was not long before his regime became a threat to the corrupt Pope Alexander, whose henchmen captured and tortured Savonarola, hung him in the center of Florence, and burnt the body before the eyes of a now vengeful citizenry. This, in Machiavelli's eyes, is what tends to happen with a nice politics. Rather than follow this unfortunate Christian example, Machiavelli suggested that a leader would do well to make judicious use of what he called virtù, virtue. Machiavelli's concept of virtù for politicians involves wisdom, strategy, strength, bravery, and when necessary, ruthlessness. In fact, at one point, Machiavelli uses the deliciously paradoxical phrase criminal virtue to describe the necessary ability of leaders to be cruel in the name of the state, and yet still good as leaders. Machiavelli provided some criteria for what constitutes the right occasion for a bit of criminal virtue. Any violence must be strictly necessary for the security of the state. It must be done swiftly, often at night, counseled Machiavelli, and it shouldn't be repeated too often, lest the reputation for mindless brutality builds up. Machiavelli gave the example of his contemporary, Cesare Borgia, whom he admired as someone who knew how to be tough but not too tough, though we might question the criteria Machiavelli used. When Cesare conquered the city of Cesena, he ordered one of his mercenaries, Ramiro de Orco, to bring order to the region, which Ramiro did through swift and brutal ways. Men were beheaded in front of their wives and children, property was seized, traitors were castrated. Cesare then turned on to Orco himself and had him sliced in half and placed in the public square, just to remind the townspeople who the true boss was. But then, as Machiavelli approvingly noted, that was enough bloodshed. Cesare moved on to cut taxes, imported some cheap grain, built a theatre, and organized a series of beautiful festivals to keep people from dwelling on unfortunate memories. The Catholic Church banned Machiavelli's works for 200 years because of the force with which he had argued that being a good Christian was incompatible with being a good leader. But even for atheists and those of us who are not politicians, Machiavelli's insights are important. He writes that we cannot be good at or for all things, not only because of our limited abilities and resources, but also because of conflicts within moral codes. Some of the fields we choose, if not politics, then perhaps business or family life, may require what we basically call difficult decisions, by which we really mean ethical trade-offs. We may have to sacrifice neo-Christian visions of kindness for the sake of practical effectiveness. We may have to lie in order to keep a relationship afloat. We may have to ignore the feelings of certain employees to keep a business going. And that, as this Machiavelli, is the price of dealing with the world as it is, and not as we feel it should be. The world has continued to love and hate Machiavelli in equal measure, but insisting on focusing our attention on the uncomfortable tension between two things we love and always want to have together, but perhaps can't: effectiveness and niceness.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. So, let me see. I need to get back. So let me try again. So let's share again. This share and this. Do you see this PowerPoint slides? That's fine.
Yes, yeah, right.
So I think my point is the Machiavelli is very much misunderstood. People think that Machiavelli means means justify ends. Okay, no, that's not what the Machiavelli is about. If I really summarize Machiavelli, this is what Jesus taught. Okay, so what did Jesus say when Jesus sent his disciples to the mission field? What did he say? Let me show you here. Matthew. Yeah, Matthew 10:16. Behold, he has sent you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Harmless is actually basically what it means good. Wise as serpents and harmless as good. Good as doves. That's basically what Machiavelli is saying. Said that if you are just live alone, that's fine. In a small circle of people, it's fine. But when you try to be to exercise leadership, just being good is not enough. You need to be effective. That's why you need wisdom, how to deal with. So I think that's basically what Machiavelli is saying. And I found that the Machiavelli's words, even though people may think that it's non-Christian, it's not compatible, but enormously relevant in teaching leadership. So that's why I put it there. And so, Steve, please go ahead about this Machiavelli, some of these quote, what these some of the writings, and this key idea is there. And so maybe Steve, could you
You
take
want me
over and
to,
then say something about Machiavelli?
you want me to read some of
Yeah,
these
go ahead.
quotes? I thought your slide on Machiavelli is helpful because he is a product of his context.
Yeah.
It's very important to understand.
Mhm.
He did not live in a time when Bible was available to everyone. So it's important to understand that his writing not based on Bible.
Mhm.
So like you said, we have to understand him as the product of his time, his context.
Mhm.
The church was falling into great instability in those years, and it really did seem like, as you said, his emphasis on the strong leadership was the only way to survive. It was later with Martin Luther and others that we came to see there's another way, the gospel way. So I was looking through some of these, and there's the typical ones that stick out, right? Like deception, never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception. It's like the Sun Tzu. That's the typical view of Machiavelli. He's like Sun Tzu.
Mhm.
And then there's also, since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved.
Mhm.
Again, he is a product of his context.
Mhm.
But at the same time, there is an awareness of the wrongness of oppression in his words.
Yeah.
He who builds on the people builds on mud,
Mhm.
standing on the backs of others. I think there was an image there. Anyway, was there one particular one you wanted to
Okay.
point out?
Yeah, because of timing, I think it's better to finish so we can discuss. Let me just give my thoughts here. If you read the Old Testament, especially the Kings or this, especially First and Second Kings, there's a tremendous cruelty in the way that God's people actually, although they are not good kings, but there are so many wars and conflicts and then killings and divisions and separations. That's what see from Old Testament from page 1 all the way. I mean, the first story of Adam and Eve is about, this blaming each other after eating the fruit from knowledge and evil. And the first event is Cain killed Abel. Okay, and then another one is, I think, the story about Noah's generation. God basically wiped out the entire world. So when I studied the Noah's generation, I asked this question to one of my students. In human history, what is the worst time in human history? Do you know when? And I just said that is Noah's ages. Okay, I never saw any human history that this entire whole world is so corrupt. Only one family left. I mean, people think that these days here, United States is not the best, this shape. But I see so many God's people around. Okay, all right. So, but the New Old Testament really showed, in other words, in Old Testament, why God's people, Israel, actually when they go to the Promised Land, why not peacefully went there, negotiate and do things. But if you do the story of God's people going to the Promised Land is a war, and so I think before we say that Machiavelli is not really relevant, I think Old Testament there's a tremendous, I think, this struggle, fighting, and so forth. Another point here is that the fact that we live here in the United States, I think is great because, as Steve mentioned, because of the gospel, there's a basic this culture that values of fairness. and the rules of law, and those things are there. That's why hard work pays off. But if you live in a society where the basic is the rules of engagement is a corruption, it's just very hard. You cannot survive by just being good. Okay, all right. So that is, I think, the point. So in the sense, I think the Machiavelli's. I think this one is a product of the age, but at the same time, I think this the need to be wise, and then need to be wise as a serpent, and then good as a dove. I think is very this relevant. That's what Christ. So as we try to formulate form information our leadership and so forth, and then this ideal and vision and goals, I think this being a blessing, this one is a very wonderful God's vision. But in the course of realizing this one, you will see the recognition of what the world really is, what this need to be done. I think that in that sense, I think the Machiavelli is very useful. I do not necessarily follow, but I actually recognize it. So a couple of months to the last month, I had these three questions. If you want to be in other times in history, do you want to prefer to be in other times in history or in the right time now where you are? My answer is I don't want to be in any other time in history. Okay, I don't want to be in time of Jesus when Jesus came here, because when I actually look at the gospel, very few people had a real contact and then conversation with Jesus. So had I been in the time of Jesus, what is my probability of a chance to talk with Jesus more than 10 minutes? Or almost zero. Okay, all right. So it's so number one, I don't want to be in other in this period of history. I like where the time where I'm in. Next one, do you want to be in any other country than where you are now? I traveled more than 40 different countries. I mean, I love a lot of good things in different countries, but I don't necessarily want to be in other countries. Number three, do you want to be someone else other than yourself? Okay. I don't want to be Joe Biden. I don't want to be Donald Trump. I love to be Paul Hong. So I know those three questions. What I found is a tremendous grace of God. The fact that we are living in this 21st century here in the United States, whether you are in Korea or in Nigeria, I think the situation we are in now is much better than the years ago. And also, I think that when we have the grace of God in our life, I think we don't want to be someone else. I think that is something I want to share. And then I want to just conclude. So what do you think the Machiavelli's main idea? Why is the idea still relevant in your life? Please think about it. And then I think this, with the conclusion, I want to say this be finished. Number one, the Bible is the book of leaders, the book of by leaders, the book for the leaders. That's one way to look at the Bible. Leadership is lifelong process of identity formation, interest development, insight acquisition, integrity implementation, and influence discharge. And three, leadership assumption, I talk about leaders are followers. There's idealism and realism, and there is life stages. We talk about this, so please read that. And then I think maybe that's the end, okay? All right. So anyway, thank you for your attention today. So one main point is that we are learning a leadership, the foundation of identity based on the grace of God, based on God's purpose in life. But more importantly, God works in us. Not only we do things, but God works in us. That sense of identity and God's purpose and direction is the very foundational of who we are and what kind of leader we become. And then throughout our life, if you have a good sense of life purpose, you will be a blessing. We are God's workmanship, salt and light. Or, I'm a follower of Christ with the way of a life. This sense of identity based on grace of God and truth of God is so liberating, so transformative, and so foundational. And that's the point of this lecture. Okay, that's all I have to say. So anybody want to make comments, and please. So Dr. Daniel Lee, you are a man of good insight. So please go ahead and make any comments. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly. My question, as I was listening to you and Shepherd Steve, why does it have to be binary choice? I mean, I do understand the reality that political leaders are either really good and loved and often ineffective, and some who are very effective tend to be very nasty. But you know, given that the situation, the context that Shepherd Steve talked about, yeah, maybe Machiavelli could think of only two choices, but can we still, look for ideal political leader who is a Christian, who has Christian value, and yet very effective in leading, like economic growth, and also national security. I mean, we don't want people like Hugo Chavez. Maybe he was loved by his people, but he ruined the whole country. And so if you ask me, would you like to have a nasty figure who is very effective as your leader, or do you want to have a nice guy who is ineffective, who ruins your economy? Of course, I will choose the first one, but I'm just saying, should we? Why can't we just hope for a leader who has both?
Anyone who wants to respond? Because timing, let me just respond. Let me just give you an example of Abraham Lincoln. What Machiavelli is saying is the presentation is somewhat simplistic. That's why good guy is ineffective, bad guy effective. That's not what Machiavelli is saying. So let's think about Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln is certainly a good man, and also is a very, very effective president. But he was not only good. That's why he actually engaged in civil war. And then more than 500,000 people died, okay? He ordered soldiers to go to the battle and die. So that's what the Machiavelli is saying. When you are a leader, even though you are very good, you should make a decision that is good for the country. That means in a micro sense, in a personal sense, that causes a tremendous hardship and sacrifice and the pain and so forth. But because you are good, you don't want to go through those aspects of leadership prize. You cannot be an effective leader. I think that is, the point. So when I look at Abraham Lincoln, I think he was enormously powerful in that. Number one, he actually is very genuine, is very redemptive. So when he became a president, he actually surrounded himself with all the rivals, former rivals. That's why one of these books, president scholar with his teams of rivals. That means he was such a tolerant. But for the sake of the United States to be united, he could not tolerate the secession of the South, even though like General Robert Lee or these people were good Christians. They have reasons why they oppose and then join war, but the state right and so forth. But Abraham Lincoln was very, very clear. We cannot tolerate this. So that's why he was willing to continue, even though, in the days and some months, tens of thousands of soldiers died and so forth. Why he did that? Because he was a leader. It was a good purpose. So I think the point here is that goodness and effectiveness must go together. Goodness alone is not make effective. So we in American history, I see a lot of good presidents who are very, very good, but very effective. Then decisiveness aspect is there. So Machiavelli is simply, saying that as a good leader, whether you're a Christian leader or whatever, in a situation, you need both that decisiveness and also generosity and goodness. So when Abraham Lincoln, one of the things I am very proud of American history is after the Civil War is over, when General Lee and then this, what is the other guy's name? The general what? Huh? The Northern General. Okay. Huh? So Northern General,
Grant, right?
Grant. Okay, so I'm sorry, Grant, and then Mehmet, and General Lee thought that there would be a tremendous retribution and even vengeance. But because of Abraham Lincoln's instruction, the point is that what's the condition of this? Surrender. No, you just can go home. Or just go home? Yeah. Can we take our horses? Of course. So that's why it is after bitter fighting, and then there was no real retribution, vengeance, and then trials for certain generals and certain presidents. This is it's a very rare in human history. Okay, all right. I never saw any history in China or Chinese history, Korean history, and European history. After fighting, more than 500,000 people died, and then the defeated parties were actually free to go home. That was a real, genuine Christian reconciliation. So when Abraham Lincoln said, "No hostility, but charity for all," I mean, this is really deeply Christian. But the point is that he executed the war, okay, and that caused so that those two these aspects of leadership really need to be properly understood. Without that, we cannot be effective leader. Not only effective leader, we cannot be a good leader. That is, I think, the point. Okay, so Steve, do you have any comments?
Well, I was just going to say that, biblically speaking, there was a reason that the priesthood and the kingship were separate. And Machiavelli was working in the time and in the halls of politics. That's what Missionary Daniel is talking about.
That's right.
And if we look at what he was able to do and what impact it had on the world, was actually very little. And that's really pretty true from all political aspects. It's just one tragedy after another. But to speak to your point, why can't we have? Actually, we do have. If we are a Christian, we belong, and our pledge of loyalty and allegiance is not to a flag or to a country, but to a kingdom. And there is a king on that throne, and his name is Jesus. And our first and primary loyalty and everything else is, but what Paul Hong, I think, is trying to say is, but we also live in this real world where there's the ruler of the prince of the air who's operating and working over the kingdoms of the earth, of which he owns and can give to anyone he pleases. That domination is the political reality in which we live. And so we see stars that shine. But I think it's really nice if you think about Machiavelli's stage, his ineffectiveness in bringing about any kind of real lasting change in the political realm is offset by what actually happened that changed the world. When Machiavelli was living, you know who else was living and working? That's Martin Luther's time.
That's right.
And so after Machiavelli failed, because politically you cannot bring about the change that the world needs, but God was working. And I think it speaks to the bigger point Paul Hong is saying, is that this power of identity and grace, that God is working underneath in our weaknesses, in our strengths, forming us, even in our world history, behind this time when the popes were being shuffled around and political favors were being operated in the context of the church. There's Martin Luther struggling to find how a righteousness and faith can work out, and the 95 Theses come out, and that changed the world more than any political leader ever could or would. So I would argue that I'm also very thankful that I'm not Joe Biden, and I'm very thankful I wasn't Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, all right then.
But at the same time, what we're doing as Bible teachers and shepherds is not less important. Raising our children as godly influence is not less important in some regard. Writing, at that same time was the first time that the Bible was written in a language that could be read by the people and shedding that word. So I think that sometimes, especially over the past 12 years, we've been deceived into thinking that everything has to work through the political spectrum.
Yeah.
But actually, God is working on a much bigger scale than the White House. And our leadership, while we can learn some things, ultimately our leadership is that one who went to the cross and whose victory was accomplished there.
All right,
I
thank
don't
you.
know. That's my opinion about that
Thank
and
you.
how I would encourage people to consider the world and the stage that nations rise and fall. In America, we've had a good run. We're now in decline as Europe did. And they rise and fall, but the kingdom of our Lord and Christ endures forever.
All
And
right,
that's what
good.
we can learn from. History is very powerful
you.
lesson for that.
Okay, thank you. We have about 5 minutes, so please bear with me. So just announcement, that is, I think this is a lecture portion, and then Dr. David Huang, he will just, just divide the different sections, put it in the video, YouTube video, and we'll make it available. Second one is for this one, for writing your posting, choose any of 2 sets, and each question you write, 200 words. So each set of 400 words or so, and then try to, write your idea, and then just provide some interesting details or examples, illustration, so that this will be very enjoyable to read. And then as far as a quiz, I'll just make a very simple quiz that is very doable. So quiz due date will be a little bit later. So March 10th, also 11 enough time. And then next, in 2 weeks, we'll start, and now different from what I did today, I'll speak less and you will speak more. Okay, so you actually prepare our presentations. So let's see, module 3, which team will be presenting? Team 3. Which team will be presenting? The module 3.
Mr. Kellogg and me.
Oh, okay. So please prepare and then be willing to talk about these things. And then if you want to engage with people with questions, feel free to do so, okay? All right? And then Steve and I also prepare some lecture portion, and then we will actually work together, okay? All right then. And the point is that at least each person will read at least one book, but that does not mean that when you make a presentation, we have to do all of it. You do at least a major part, but before the end of this this course, you just prepare a very nice PowerPoints of one whole book. But at the assigned scheduled date, you will be just presenting the major idea so that we can actually see what this is about, and then try to connect the main theme. Okay, how this book is connected to the main theme. Okay, that's what I do. So next lesson is interest. So we have identity, then these are purpose, but how do you actually realize the identity? That is a defining interest. That means your area. So purpose is a foundational. Next one is a priority. Okay, all right. So we'll look at those things. So that's the end of all today's lesson. So if you don't mind, I'll just let me pray shortly and we conclude. Okay, thank you so much. Father, we thank you for giving us this wonderful time together. And so we recognize your sovereign purpose and then providence. Once we were sinners, you called us, you saved us, and then granted us the grace of Jesus. So by the grace of God, we are what we are. And then we have done some good things, some bad things in between, but we always remember God's grace overcome all. So we may have a solid this foundation based on grace of Jesus, the grace of salvation. So because of God's this grace and His purpose and His vision, His work, God who works in us will carry it unto completion until the day of Christ Jesus. With their confidence, we may be willing to take a responsible actions for our lives and for those we love and with those we intend to serve, so that we can truly be an instrument of God's peace and grace. Thank you for this study today. In Jesus' name, amen.